All right, guys, just kind of picking up where we left off. I am going to be reviewing this toy game. We've got now a 2-to-1 SPR, so 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio. We still have two symmetric ranges. We will be getting into models where other things are different, but for now it's the same exact model. You can go back and look at the previous video for all of the inputs and everything, but it just the cliffs are two identical ranges, no blocking effects. Boards deuce, 3-3, 2-to-1 SPR, 200 in the stack, 100 in the middle. All bet sizes available to both players. Okay, so with that, we can just get right into what the strategy should look like. So I want you to kind of take a second and just kind of write down what bet size do you think the out of position player is going to utilize the most often? What bet sizes are not appropriate? So what bet sizes get used? What bet sizes don't get used? Both of those questions are really important. Yeah, so just pause this, think about it, and here we go. Okay, so the first things first, the strategy is difficult. Okay, that's the first thing. There's lots of mixing, lots of strategy, lots of bet sizings are appropriate. Okay. So lots of bet sizings are appropriate in this scenario for out of position. One of the other things is that we're still bluffing with the exact same idea of bluffing from the bottom of the range. So that's very nice. We see that we're bluffing with pocket fours. We're bluffing with the lowest EV combo in our range, and obviously value betting higher up. The other thing that's consistent with this model and the previous one is jacks and tens are the hands that bet the most, as opposed to like aces, kings, and queens, even though aces, kings, and queens are the nuts. Okay. So again, this idea of betting the hands that can get a lot of value if they bet, get called by a lot of worse hands. That's what I mean. So it's like that's the consequence that I'm referring to. Hands that if they bet, they can get called by a lot of worse hands, but at the same time are not really hands that are strong enough to check raise. Okay, so that characteristic where you definitely don't want to check raise jacks and tens and run into the other guys, aces, kings, and queens. But if you bet small enough with jacks and tens, you can see here this 10% bet being used, and it's being used by pocket tens exclusively. Pocket tens does not bet to any other size at all. It just likes betting to 10% size, which is very small. And again, this might even be a size that you don't want to use, and that's totally fine if you don't want to use this size, and you just check your pocket tens and you bet your pocket jacks to a 30% size. The point is the same though. These hands that can get value can get called by a lot of worse hands if they choose a specific sizing choice, but don't want to. But can't check raise themselves, are nowhere close to being that strong. Those hands are very high frequency bets to the respective size that is appropriate for them. So, okay, so then aces, kings, and queens, the nut combos get allocated to various ranges, whether that range is block to a 10%. So you see like pocket aces is using the 10% size, the 30% size, and the half pot size. It's not really using pot, which is interesting in and of itself. Kings is betting to pot a lot, half pot a lot. And also mixing the check, betting to the block a little bit, betting to 30% a little bit, etc. So one of the other things that stands out is that there's no shoving. And this is something that I think lots of people at really high stakes screw up. They think that because they have the nuts, because they've got it at this point in the hand, that introduces shoving at a 2-to-1 SPR. That because they can shove, that shoving should exist for them. That's oftentimes not the case. Particularly when you're looking at two symmetric ranges or a range where your opponent also has the nuts. Okay, so situations where you don't have any nut advantages relative to your opponent. So here we have pocket aces, that's great, but so does our opponent. Our opponent still has pocket aces also. And so you want to think about betting as having these natural consequences. The bigger you bet, the less often your opponent calls. Now you're getting paid more, so that's a trade-off, right? The bigger you bet, the more money you're going to make when you get called, but your opponent has to call less often relative to other sizing choices. Okay, so if your opponent can have the nuts, like really strong hands, the bigger you bet, the larger the fraction of your opponent's defending strategy the nuts will become, obviously, because your opponent's never going to fold the nuts. So if you bet bigger and bigger and bigger, they will fold more and more and more. And as a result of that folding, they're going to continue to fold the weaker hands, and the nuts makes up a bigger and bigger part of their defending strategy. And in some instances, that's just totally unacceptable. And you make a better EV, you make more money, make more profit by betting to a smaller size and forcing the range to be a little bit weaker. Okay, so in this instance, even though when we bet pot, we're putting in half our stack, even though when we bet, we could, even though we have the nuts in our range, nonetheless, we are not shoving at all. There is no allocation to jam here. And this is only a 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio. This is not like, some crazy deep spot. It's only 2-to-1. And there's no shoving. So what this is actually forcing is it's forcing a little bit of pocket fours into the check option. And that's because we're doing a lot of this block. We're doing a lot of this bet 30%. We're doing a lot of this bet half pot. We're not doing as much even of this bet pot, and we're not doing any jamming. And so we can't use all of our bluffs, even though we would like to, because keep in mind again that the smaller the bet sizing that we choose, the fewer the value bets we get to pair with each, the fewer the bluffs we get to pair with each value bet. So the bigger you bet, the more bluffs per value bet. The smaller you bet, the fewer bluffs per value bet. Again, I went over this math in the previous video. You can go back and watch it. As a quick example, I'll do one quick example just so that you can kind of see what I'm referring to exactly here. If we bet 10, the pot after our bet is going to be 110. And so we would expect something in the vicinity of a 9% fold. We may get something slightly different from that, but we'd expect something in the vicinity of a 9% fold. Just a quick fact check. We're getting something in the vicinity of a 9% fold here. Okay. So that's that calculation. You can see it right here, what I did, how it works. I think I explained in the previous video. I don't want to explain too much about how it works, but just understand that this calculation holds true. And if your opponent's going to 9% fold, okay, that means they're going to mostly call. It's not going to be a sizing choice that you want to bluff with very often. So what bluff to value ratio are you going to choose? Well, your opponent's going to call 10. The total pot will be 120. And so you're going to want to have approximately 8.3% of your range be bluffs. Okay, that's it. So 92% of the time you have value, 8% of the time you have a bluff. Whereas if you bet to a pot size, 33% of that pot size bet will be a bluff. Okay, so of that range. So again, far more bluffs per value bet if you bet bigger, far fewer bluffs per value bet when you bet smaller. Okay. I think that's mostly what I want to cover here for the out of position strategy. I guess I didn't really talk about these bluff catching hands, but I'm kind of part and parcel with betting up here and bluffing down here as we check this part of the range. So keep in mind, if you have a hand categorized as a bluff catcher, or a hand that kind of looks like a bluff but still beats a few things, that's a hand that you may want to really, really heavily consider checking. These are just characteristics of hands that show up when you're actually playing. So you always want to relate this back to playing and have a good understanding of that. So with that, we will go ahead and move on to the in position strategy now. All right, so now we've got in position strategy here. And we can take a look at what we're seeing. So one of the things we're seeing is we're still seeing what I like to say is, what are we not seeing, right? We're not seeing small bets. Okay, so small bets here don't exist. Again, there are, it's not impossible for bets under half pot to come in, but it's quite specific when they're appropriate. And if you never used a bet below half pot, you'd be playing just fine. And you could have a very healthy win rate and never use a bet below half pot as the in position player. It's very nuanced when it's appropriate. So what we're seeing here is just the reinforcement of the idea that betting really small as the in position player sucks. Okay, so as the in position player, you should be using larger bet sizes. What we're also seeing here is the implementation of a shoving strategy. So out of position, no shoving. In position, shoving. Ranges, similar, but not identical anymore. And you need to keep that in mind. Things have changed because your opponent has bet. Okay? Because your opponent has bet. Now, in this instance, your opponent has checked, but your opponent had the opportunity to bet. So the out of position player is dealing with two symmetric ranges. Okay? The in position player is not. And that's an incredibly important distinction to draw. The out of position player is dealing with two symmetric ranges. In position is not. Things have changed. Okay. So the out of position player's range no longer has pocket fours in it. The out of position player's range no longer has jacks and tens in it. The out of position player's range no longer has aces at a full weight. Okay. So as the in position player here, you know that when if you shove pocket aces, you could run into pocket aces. You could, but it's not going to be the same weight. And so it's not fully weighted, whereas your opponent is fully weighted in pocket nines, because pocket nines was pure check for out of position. Pocket eights is pure check for out of position. So the hands that out of position most likely has when they check are hands like nines or eights or sevens. The hands that out of position, it's not even. It's not even, right? So that's an important consequence for a host of strategies. In addition to that, the in position player does not have to protect a checking range at all, or does not have to weigh checking or the EV of checking when you have the nuts. So as the out of position player, out of position could bet with a hand like the nuts, but the out of position player also has to think about checking the nuts and the possibility that might actually generate more EV if the opponent bets, all the time. If the opponent's just if you check and your opponent bets all the time, then the most profitable way to play pocket aces will be to check, right? If you check pocket aces and your opponent always shoves, then then you should just check pocket aces, right? So you have the out of position player has to consider checking with pocket aces and whether or not that's a viable path to generating EV for that hand, okay? Or generating the maximum EV for that hand, okay? In position doesn't have to think about that. In position just has to think about which bet makes the most money. If you have the nuts and you're in position, there's no thinking about checking. The only thing you're thinking about is which bet size makes me the most money. And in that category, aces is becoming, because aces is also underweight for the other player, aces will be a smaller fraction of the out of position player's defending strategy against a jam than it would be if out of position had shoved into the in position player. And that can be a little bit confusing. So if you have to slow that down and play it back, go ahead. But if the out of position player jammed its pocket aces combo, in position had a fully weighted pocket aces, kings, queens, jacks, the whole range was fully weighted. And so aces would make up a reasonable fraction of the defending strategy. Of course, for out of position, aces is not fully weighted. Nines is, and so is eights. So when in position jams for 2x pot and the out of position player defends, approximately speaking, 1/3 of the range, which is what's going to happen. 1/3 of the range is going to have a lot of pocket nines in it relative to pocket aces. Okay. That's the idea that I'm trying to put forward. Yeah, there's a lot of, so there are just a number of considerations. All of these pocket aces just get allocated to the bet sizing choices. The range is just going to be polar. So it's just aces, kings, and queens. It's just the strongest hands. Yes, jacks and tens bet a little bit, but I mean, primarily this is just aces, kings, and queens. We keep our value ratio, bluff to value ratio intact. We're betting big, and it's really just that simple. So when we shove, for example here, aces does call, kings does call, queens does call. So there's a lot of values that's being had here. But then, of course, nines also calls. And yes, it's a small fraction, relatively speaking, but keep in mind that this is a small fraction of a more fully weighted combo. There's about twice as much pocket nines in this range, I believe, as there is pocket aces. So this is like more like a 40% call, if you were to think about it in relation to pocket aces. So pocket nines, but then there's also pocket eights, and there's also pocket sevens, and there's also pocket sixes. All of these hands have to call. Keep in mind that the in position player is bluffing with pocket fives. So in position doesn't call with any pocket fives. It's just the hands that beat the bluffs. So sixes through nines, bluff catch. Queens chops with queens, which is one of the hands that's value betting fairly often. I believe fairly often. Oh no, queens is not actually value betting to 2x pot. It's just kings and aces. Okay, cool. Just kings and aces value betting to 2x pot. Okay, and let's see, is there anything else? Take a look at this pot size bet, and again, you see like same sort of relationship, aces and kings obviously doing some jamming, and these hands still having a bluff catch. Okay, I think that's going to call it for this one, and we can move on to our next toy game.